I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Yusuf, Jimmy, you know it's Minnesota that we're in when we're laughing at the heat wave being over 20 degrees. Uh, Kamal King, brother, how are you down there in Atlanta?
I don't see Kamal yet. I see Clinton.
Aha, Clinton. Okay, Clinton, how are you? Kamal's going to be joining us. Clinton, how you doing?
I'm kicking, but not high.
Here we go. Well, we're all three here enjoying Minnesota and marveling at our capacity to withstand and in fact, enjoy this phenomenal swinging weather. Let's jump right into this. The big news today for me, and I want to go to you, Clinton, is the news about Justice Breyer deciding that he was stepping down and what that means, what the process is for the selection of a new Supreme Court justice and what it means that the President Biden, has talked a lot about making sure his first appointee or an appointee will be an African American woman. So I would love, Brother Collins, if you would, with your legal mind and experience, walk us through the process. What has happened now with the decision and announcement of Justice Breyer and how it's going to unfold till that seat is filled again, and what we should be watching for as community in general, as Black folks in particular.
Well, I'll start with the process, and then Yusuf certainly could speak as well as I can as to the significance. The process is, first of all, with few exceptions in the last several decades, there's been a certain set of credentials that you have to have in order to be considered seriously. It didn't always used to be that way. In fact, the Constitution doesn't say anything really about requirements. But what's happened, certainly since the 50s and the 60s, is that there are certain schools that have the inside track. That generally speaking, if you want to be seriously considered, you're best to have had two credentials, really three. To have either Harvard or Yale somewhere on your resume, to have been on the law review or some comparable journal, and to have been a clerk for a Supreme Court justice. And when you look, certainly within my practice years, which goes back to the 80s, everybody that's been considered, with a very few notable exceptions, had all three in their background. They either went to Harvard College or Yale College, but Yale Law School. And even though Harvard may be more well known to lay people, Yale is actually the hardest law school to get into in the country. And that's because it has a very small class. The starting classes at Harvard are roughly about 500 people, and Yale is half that. And that Yale has a very strong record of getting people into prestigious clerkships after law school, and a lot of their graduates end up going into academia. So that's one thing. You have to have the right schools. Now, there have been exceptions to that. I mean, the most notable one is Amy Barrett, who was appointed by Trump.
In less than a month.
Who went to, I believe, Brigham Young as an undergrad and then went to Notre Dame Law School. Now, apparently, from what I've read and heard about her, she could have gotten into Harvard or Yale, but for religious reasons, and again, I may be wrong about the undergrad, but I know she went to Notre Dame Law School, chose to go to Notre Dame. And I think Trump, for political reasons, thought it would play to his base to have someone without that Ivy League background. But having said that, she had clerked for, I think she had a Supreme Court clerkship. Certainly she had a federal clerkship, but she was on the law review. And so what most presidents do at the very beginning of their term is to put together a short list, because you want to make sure that there aren't any surprises, like what happened with Judge Woods in the early 90s when Bill Clinton tried to get her, I believe, either on the Supreme Court or maybe in one of the courts of appeals. And it turned out that she had a nanny problem where she had a nanny that was being paid off the books. And so what you want to do, once you've identified people that have what the legal profession considers to be these sterling credentials, Harvard or Yale in your background, maybe a school like Columbia or Michigan, which is in the top 10 law schools. But again, the right schools, a clerkship, ideally clerking for a Supreme Court justice, and the law review experience, and just to be squeaky, squeaky clean. You almost have to be a monk. And so the fact that Ketanji Jackson is at the top of the list makes a lot of sense to me, because she has all those prerequisite credentials, and she's recently been appointed to the Court of Appeals for the DC Circuit. I mean, the way the court system is set up, you have the Supreme Court, the country is divided into a number of circuits. The DC Court of Appeals circuit has historically been a launching pad to the Supreme Court. And since she just went through that process, then they would have found any skeletons by now.
Clinton, which of the finalists is the one who was endorsed by Senator Clyburn from South Carolina? Because
Giles.
Yeah, but, she went to South Carolina Law School, and I think that she'll get interviewed by the president. But I think for this, because this is the first Black woman, they're going to want to make sure that there is absolutely no question about her intellectual rigor and ability. South Carolina is a decent state law school, but it is not in that upper tier. There is a group of law schools called the T14. And there are all the Ivy League law schools, in addition to the University of Michigan, Virginia, Berkeley, New York University, and Georgetown, and maybe a few others that I can't think of. Duke, maybe down south. And those T14 are the schools that all the big Wall Street law firms recruit at. And with the exception of Barrett, who was appointed by Trump, no one, at least in recent memory, has been appointed to the Supreme Court who didn't come from one of those top 14 law schools. And generally speaking, they've come from either Harvard or Yale, or they have Harvard or Yale somewhere in their background.
Yeah,
so,
but Charles has Clyburn and both of her state senators backing her. So she's going to be formidable competition. And she has a squeaky.
Well, yes and no, but as I've said, you cannot, fully appreciate the incredible institutional bias towards the Ivy League schools and especially Harvard and Yale.
Clinton,
I think one thing that might help her is, and also with there is a woman who's being considered from the California Supreme Court. I can't remember her name. She's fairly young. I mean, because Breyer did not get it the first time. Clinton had to appoint him twice. He tried the first time, and I can't remember what the issue was. Oh, he considered him, and then he ended up going with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But Breyer was very gracious about getting passed over. And so when Clinton got his second opening, then he appointed Breyer. So some of these other people that you've mentioned, particularly the woman from South Carolina, I could see, depending on her age, that if Biden gets a second term, or if the Democrats can hold the White House for a second term, she might be considered. But as I've said, that bias towards having that Ivy League pedigree is incredibly strong.
I think it's strong and normal in certain times, Clinton, but let's not forget that it was Clyburn who literally forced the president to include appointing the first Black woman to the Supreme Court in the final debate, and endorsed him, which many people credit not only with his carrying Super Tuesday in South Carolina, but the election. And Biden is someone who remembers the practice on Capitol Hill of remembering the favors that you are paid when you're in a position to repay them. So I think the fact that Clyburn and two other senators have endorsed her does make her a formidable candidate. It's not a guarantee, but I want to share four things with you. One, I pointed out on a recent show that 18 of the first 30 justices of the Supreme Court were all slaveholders. Okay. And when we look at the history of the replacements on the court, when Thurgood Marshall was no longer a member of the court, Howard Grad said, we want a Black Supreme Court justice. And what did we get? Okay, Clarence Thomas. So I think we need to be real careful in terms of saying that we want a distinguished black female jurist on the Supreme Court. Okay, we don't want somebody who's just going to go along with the program. Clarence sat in the background for how many years, Kamal and Clinton, before he ever opened his mouth during oral arguments? Was it 2 or 3 years that he never said a word
Yale
in any
graduate.
oral arguments?
Well, one other thing I want to mention, though, and I think this can't be underestimated, is that Jackson has just in the last year been appointed to the Court of Appeals, and she went through an incredible vetting process.
Yeah.
And that cannot be underestimated. That right, given some of the other gaffes he's made recently.
So did the Attorney General, Clinton.
Pardon me?
So did the current Attorney General. And it didn't help him get a committee.
But anyway, and so the point I was going to make is that he can't afford any more gaffes. And the fact that she's already been confirmed once by the entire Senate for the most prestigious bench in the country, other than the Supreme Court, means that if there are any skeletons, they would have found them. Trust me, the Republicans worked overtime on her, and they could not dig up enough dirt or any dirt to derail that nomination. And so I think looking at it not only from a legal point of view of what credentials are most impressive to the people who make these decisions, the fact that she's just recently has been vetted and was vetted thoroughly means that any subsequent investigation on her is not going to have to be nearly as intense as it's going to have to be on the judge from South Carolina.
The other point that I wanted to make in terms of criteria is judicial distinction, because I think that's important. And I think a number of the candidates who are on the short list have demonstrated judicial distinction, which is an absolute requirement, including Breyer's clerk. Okay. And I think that the woman who clerked for Breyer also has, is in significant position in terms of the candidates.
Oh, yeah, I absolutely agree. But one advantage she has, she's in her early 40s.
Yeah.
And that cuts both ways. On the one hand, that means that if she were appointed, she could be there for 30 years or more, 40 years. I mean, like Clarence Thomas was appointed as a relatively young man, judicially speaking. And, he's been there since H.W. Bush, which was the early 90s. But on the other hand, sometimes you have to go through the process a time or two before you finally get it. And but I think any of the people that I've researched that he's considering, I think all of them will be fair-minded and will serve the country well and will not turn out to be another Clarence Thomas.
We're talking about this being the first African-American woman on the court. I was listening to a program the other day, and the host was saying, or the discussants were saying, not really the first, perhaps the second, in that they were considering Justice Sotomayor, an African-American too. She's Latina. She's Puerto Rican. But the makeup of that certainly is African as well. So that's part of the intrigue, and it might be that we're going to end up with 2 African-American women on the court if one of the nominees under consideration. Kamal, what's your take on this whole process as you look at both the stepping down or retiring of Justice Breyer, and from your position as a lawyer, how do you see this opportunity unfolding for both the country and for our people?
I'm glad to see Justice Breyer stepping down while there's a Democrat in the White House. Justice Ginsburg was encouraged to step down, but she didn't. And as a result of her not stepping down, we ended up with these 3 Trump appointees. Regardless of what school they go to, I think that all 3 of these women that are being considered are well qualified. And I think that we are in a good position, and we will be in a good position with any of the 3. As Clinton has said, I think that Justice Jackson would be the easiest one to be confirmed, for sure, because of all the reasons that Clinton stated. This lady, Miss Childs, though, is still a political appointment. And the same way that Clarence Thomas, who was not qualified to be on the court, got on straight by politics, straight political, I think that Miss Childs would serve us well. And she does have the support of both senators and her and Representative Claiborne, which is very, very strong, very, very strong, and which may outweigh the propensity to go with the Ivy League.
Well, one thing I wonder about, though, is why President Biden didn't appoint her to the Court of Appeals first.
Mm-hmm. I don't know.
That as I've said, that court is considered a stepping stone. And then had she gotten it, she would have been vetted. And not that they're going to not continue to vet Jackson, but because of the role of the DC Circuit over the years, but I mean, it's common knowledge in legal circles that, like, for example, Scalia came from the DC Circuit. Mm-hmm. And you look at the current making the Supreme Court, there's at least one or two others that served on the circuit before they went to the court, just for that very reason. You can get them vetted. They get an opportunity to show what they would be like handling high-level appeals, because the highest level appeals and the ones that are the most legally significant often come from that circuit.
It should also be pointed out from a community perspective that a lot of lay people don't understand that less than 1% of the appeals cases that are handled actually show up before the Supreme Court. Granted, they are the priority cases and the ones with the most national significance, but we need to go back to the Trump administration and look at the number of judges that he appointed to appeals courts, because that's where 99% of the legal, policy, and other critical matters are handled that do not make it to the Supreme Court. So we're talking about very important cases, but we're only talking about less than 1% of those that go to the appeals courts in the United States. And I think that, as I said, a lot of lay people may not understand that. Yes, the Supreme Court is significant, but there are other positions and appointments that are equally important, I think, in terms of their impact nationally.
Let me ask all three of you to weigh in on the question of how we should, as Black people or as citizens, not necessarily Black, but just as Americans, both make ourselves aware, to weigh in, to understand what it means to us personally that decisions like this are being made. We know that these changes in the makeup of persons on the court is very significant, but how significant is it, and how and why should it matter to ordinary neighbors and friends in community? Kamal, start with you, and then Clinton and Youssef.
It's, when you look at when I look at the decisions that Clarence Thomas has made, especially with regard to criminal law, it becomes imperative that these people have far-reaching influence on not only the high-level cases, but on everyday, stop and frisk, how you're going to be treated if you ended up in prison, whether or not prisons have to be have to rise to some standard of decency. And when I look at his decisions in the criminal law area, which impacts Blacks, I just have to shake my head and I say that this is the reason that we have to be on target with this decision. And I like both Jackson and Childs. I don't know much about Kruger. I plan to find out more about her, but her background is not as solid to me with regard to African Americans as Judge Jackson and Judge Childs?
Clinton, what do you think?
Well, it just reminds me in a very bitter, ironic way, what we lost, especially Black people, by not electing Hillary Clinton in 2016.
Uh-huh.
We would be looking at a whole different court right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what we have to do is not only educate people about the importance of this election or being on the Supreme Court, and I think people get it more so now than they used to, but the importance of voting in general. Just think if Hillary Clinton had been elected in 2016, there was a good chance she would have been reelected in 2020, rather than a 6-3 court leading conservative, we would have a 6-3 court leading the other way. And just think of all the major voting rights cases, for example, that would have been decided entirely differently if Hillary had had those appointments. And so to me, that's maybe even the greater lesson is elections have consequences. And one of the greatest consequences is who gets to make these appointments, because particularly as both parties, but especially the Republicans have been doing very effectively, if you appoint people in their 40s or early 50s, they could be there for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you look at Breyer. Breyer got appointed in his, I guess, late 50s, almost 60s. He's been there 27. And, you know, Clarence Thomas was there before Breyer, and he's younger. He could be there another 10 or 15 years mucking stuff up.
Mm.
That's the real scary proposition. And that's why it is so important that we get out there and make sure, especially in those states where the Republicans are trying so hard to keep us from voting, is to get out there and to vote and make sure that we have a president who is not going to appoint the Clarence Thomases and the Aldi Altos and the Bennetts and all that Barretts, excuse me.
Yusuf, this is a teachable moment, I think. What are your thoughts about how we engage like we're doing now and in the newspaper and on radio and at dinner tables, so that we educate ourselves along the issues that both Kamau and Clinton's have brought up? Because there are consequences, but part of the problem is that we have either been shielded from or sometimes chosen to ignore the obligation that we must have to develop a vocabulary, an understanding, a capacity to articulate both our interest and the process in a way that inserts us in the process. What do you think, Yusuf?
Well,
Go ahead, jump in.
I want to say a few things, Al, because I have several opinions on this topic, or a fairly complex opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd like to precede it by pointing out that I'm not legally trained. And that does not suggest that either you, Kamau, or Clinton are not qualified to speak from a community perspective. I just want to point out that I speak entirely from a community and a political perspective. To your point, the upcoming election is critical, not only in terms of appointments to the Supreme Court, but all of the appointments across the board, to the cabinet, to the many federal agencies that have an impact on our lives and on the future of this country. And we've seen over the 4 years of the predecessor in the White House how much damage can be done from that position. Okay, look, he appointed more people to judgeships, I think, than had been done in anyone's memory. And I have a particularly long memory, which reminds me, hearing Hillary Clinton's name, that she won the state of Minnesota over Donald Trump by 1.5 percentage points. And unfortunately, we were one of the few states where that was the case. But had she become president, my sense is that the woman who served for 7 years on Walmart's board, and the woman who, when she was in college, was the president of the College Republicans for Goldwater and worked aggressively to overturn the Brown v. Board of Education decision, would have appointed a lot of white women to the Supreme Court, but not necessarily black people. So that we have no guarantee that that would have been the case. Now, I want to suggest that
Meaning the question becomes then, Youssef, better off with Trump or better off with Hillary, or better either way. Better either way.
There's no doubt that we would have not suffered through the appointments that Trump made. Okay, number one. But this is also the woman who, along with her husband, at a fundraiser where Barack Obama was present, said 10 years ago that boy would have been serving us coffee. Okay, and I do not believe that Bill Clinton was the first black president, or that his wife would have been the savior of the African American community. What I do want to say is that when Derek Chauvin was convicted, people said, well, there's no longer any need for us to do anything about the criminal justice system. And the appointment of a black judge is going to cause a lot of people to say, well, they got their black judge. That's all we need to do for black people, legally or in terms of the political process. So we can't rest on one appointment and not continue to do voter registration, voter education, and to be active in the community. Minnesota has 2 senators who are in this game. And we're talking about Amy Klobuchar, and we're talking about Tina Smith. And it's not just a question of contacting them and encouraging them to vote for the people who we believe are best candidates or favorites, and to advocate and organize among their peers to convince other people to be very active in getting this confirmation of whoever the president nominates through, but also this question of expanding the Supreme Court. Because with a 6-3 majority, it could be a generation or 30 years before that balance reverses itself and we have some type of equanimity on the Supreme Court. Because with a 6-3 majority of conservatives, we're still going to have an uphill climb, regardless of the issue that comes before the court, unless the 3 conservative or liberal justices are able to convince as many of their conservative counterparts to side with them on issues that are going to be before the court. So we're talking about a replacement. We're not talking about a reform or a change in the structure and the representation that's on the Supreme Court. And we have to be realistic about that in communicating with people. So we want a distinguished, qualified African-American female jurist to go through the confirmation process and be seated to make sure that we don't lose any more. Because Ruth Bader Ginsburg, on her dying deathbed, said, please wait until after the election to identify and confirm my replacement. And McConnell rushed that confirmation through in approximate, was it 28 days? I mean, it's unbelievable. Now, one other point, the conservatives all over the country are doing jumping jacks and having heart attacks about how inconsistent and improbable and unthinkable it is for Biden to make a public commitment that he's going to appoint a black woman to the judge, forgetting all about Ronald Reagan, who was opposed to the Equal Rights Amendment. And in 1980, a month before the election that he won over Jimmy Carter, when he was way behind in terms of women in the country, he met with a group of Republican women. And the result was that he came forward and said he was going to appoint a white woman to the Supreme Court. Well, I'm sorry, let me back up. He didn't say a white woman, but obviously that was what he was going to do. Okay. He said, if elected, I will appoint a woman to the Supreme Court. And he did appoint a white woman. Okay. And even the black woman who was on his staff at that time argued against it and said, you'll look like you're caving in and so on and so forth. But they had no problem with Sandra Day O'Connor being confirmed and appointed to the Supreme Court. But they have a problem with Joe Biden saying that he's going to appoint an extremely qualified black jurist to the Supreme Court. So I think we need to take a long view in looking at this and recognize that this is the first step in a continuum that is an ongoing and arduous process moving forward, politically and culturally.
Yeah. We've got a couple of people monitoring and making comments in the comment from Facebook. David Kelly, thank you for your comment, and Zoya Code. And if you want to, AZ, if you can capture their comments and put them on a scroll, that would be awesome to appreciate their comments. David E. Kelly, his comment is beneath us there. And Clinton, why don't you look at that and respond to it? Can you put
where would I find it?
David Kelly? Should be on the screen now. Do you see it?
Okay. Because I'm on my phone here. So
Okay.
let me see if I can read it. I need to get close to read it.
And Kamal, can you read it?
Yeah, I can read it, but I just wanted to say that the Republicans did us a favor by changing the Senate rules so that a majority, just a simple majority, could get on the Supreme Court. Because if they had to do the same thing again, I'm not sure that Manchin or this woman from Arizona would vote to change the rules. Republicans have no problem doing what's necessary to get their way and to run their program.
Hypocrites.
Okay, I just read the comment, and I don't know if Mr. Kelly, I mean, he makes this kind of broad-based accusation that the courts are corrupt, and at least here in Minnesota, I think, generally speaking, I'll speak specifically to Hennepin and Ramsey County. I think we have a pretty fair bench. We've had between Governor not Pawlenty, excuse me, forget him, but I mean the last several governors.
Governor Dayton.
Carlson. Dayton. He's gone.
Yeah.
There was a second comment too, Al.
Yeah, there was one previous to that, AZ, you can put it on, from Zoya Code. And yeah.
At least here in the metro area.
We lost you for a second, Clinton.
I think is fair. And I think in the Chauvin trial,
Clinton?
we saw that the judge
Clinton?
there, I think, ran a very fair trial. It was very balanced. And the fact that Chauvin decided to not try to pursue any appeal seriously was a demonstration of that. So I think that we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say that because there have been bad experiences with judges in certain parts of the country in the past, maybe even here in Minnesota, to say that they're all corrupt now. I don't think that's true about the bench in Minnesota, particularly in the metro area.
I think that's like the police department. There are good and bad members. Okay. Mm-hmm. And there have been fair and unfair decisions that have been handed down.
Clinton, I know you've got to leave in a couple of minutes. We hear you. We hear you when we see you. I'm not sure if your audio is not working for you. Yeah, we hear you and we see you, Clinton. Are you hearing me now or not? So I'm not sure he's able to hear us.
I'm going to have to sign out, sign back in because I've lost the audio for some reason.
Okay. Yeah, do that.
Let me comment on the second issue, Al, because the NAACP, of which I am a member at the state and local level, has long been involved in voter education and voter registration, even to the point where we've gone into the jails and done voter registration. The woman raises a significant point because in many elections where the municipal and school district elections are on the front of the ballot and the judicial elections are on the rear of the ballot, many of the people in our community have no idea who the judicial candidates or the positions are. And that's a travesty because the people who get appointed to the bench are the people who are elected by those who are familiar with the races, with the candidates, and with the process. And people are concerned about who their city council member is going to be, who their state representative is going to be. And that reminds me, are we going to talk about the Ramsey County Commission at some point before we?
Yeah, sure. Before we close out. Sure, certainly.
But blank ballots are only important when people have absolutely no information about who the candidates for those offices are. We shouldn't be guessing about who we vote for or picking a box and filling it in, or a circle, or pulling the hammer, whatever's necessary to cast our vote for somebody that we know absolutely nothing about. So that means people assuming the responsibility to become more informed and to be aware of who is running and who brings the category of possibilities, and who brings the fear of failure.
I see we're joined by Burnell Venable Powell. Glad to see you, Burnell. Thank you for joining Dean Powell. I don't know if you've had a chance to monitor the conversation, but I'm glad you're here. Jump in.
Well, good afternoon. I think that there's not a whole lot I can add to what Yusuf was saying. I did want the opportunity to join you this afternoon, though, because of the president's announcement that there's now formally been a retirement from the court, and that he is going to go forward with his plans to pick a successor, and he's committed to that successor being a woman. And on that list of possible candidates is a friend of mine, Michelle Childs. I do not know the other candidates, but I will say that Childs is an outstanding person, someone of I think sufficient intellect, and more than that, a real human being, in the sense that this is someone who not only brings intellectual health, but also brings an ability to communicate with other human beings, and to end up having them act as a champion. And should there be a time down the line, after she's been on the bench for a while, for a Chief Justice to be named, I would think that she would be the kind of person who could command the respect of the other members of the court, and might someday be a Chief Justice. Now, of course, she's got to get past the first hurdle, and that is to get an appointment. And there are a couple of other candidates who've been put forward. I don't know them personally, but I do know that Judge Katani Brown, who was a clerk to Stephen Breyer, seems to be the front runner at this point.
Tell me, have you talked to the South Carolina, your friend, Ms. Childs, about the possibility?
No, I have not. I think at one point I made a passing, joking reference to her about her possible ascendancy, but that was not even recent, and I've seen nothing except a rising star since that time. At this point, she's being openly talked about nationally, and that's always a good thing.
Clinton earlier talked about the fact that the advantage Tanya Jackson Brown has is that she was recently appointed and approved by the Senate for the Court of Appeals.
Yeah.
And so she's been vetted, and obviously is squeaky clean. How much of an advantage does that give her from your point of view, and how does Childs go through that process and find her way onto the court from your point of view?
Well, I think that the key thing that Brown has going for her is the fact that she's already been vetted, which means that there is not a great likelihood that anything new is going to come out about her, and that it will simply be a question of can we go through the process. And Senator German is going to be leading the judicial process, confirmation process in the Senate, and he's already indicated to the Majority Leader Schumer that he is ready to move forward at a steady and rapid pace. It took about a month, I think, to confirm Amy Coney Bryant to the court after the Republicans had set on the prior attempts to fill a nomination for over a year. They then came forward and said, okay, we're now ready to go and we can do this speedily. And they confirmed her in almost record time. I don't know that it was an absolute record, but the fact that they had the majority and there was not anything that that could be brought forth in terms of disqualifying character aspects meant that she was probably a shoo-in from day one. And I would say that the same thing is likely to be true with respect to Brown. At this point, what we know about her is that she's on the Court of Appeals. There is not going to be a record there that is going to be disqualifying. That only enhances it. One of the things that is regularly done is that when you think that you have someone that you want to move to the court, you move them to the second most important court in the land, and that's the DC Circuit. And I would expect that she's going to be moved forward very rapidly. With respect to Michelle Childs, though, she has the backing of our congressman, drawing a blank on the congressman's name, but
Clymer, yeah.
Clymer, and with respect to Clymer, it is absolutely well known that Clymer came through at the time of the Democratic primary, went on the record that Biden was his man, and Biden at that point won a landslide victory here in South Carolina, and went on to run up victories in several other states of landslide proportion, particularly among Black voters. So Biden knows that he has a commitment outstanding that he made to Black voters, that he was going to take their counsel seriously and address a number of concerns related to the Black community. With that on the table, it certainly would be a big payoff for Clymer to have this appointment be someone who he has a close working relationship with.
Kamal,
yeah, I have a couple of questions for Burnell. Brother Clinton made references to the fact that these people coming from Harvard and Yale and Ivy League law schools have an inside track, which we know to be the case. I know that you have a Harvard credential in your background, but this lady from South Carolina, Childs, she doesn't.
Yes.
How should that impact her Biden's decision?
Well, the great thing about it is that to be on the short list and not have an Ivy League education means that you're the only one at the top of the list who can claim to be representative of the rest of the nation. And so from a political standpoint, you take what some would argue would be a weakness and you turn it into a strength. And once you get to interact with Childs, you see how much of a strength it is. She is very articulate, absolutely charming, smart, and she understands not only the law, but she understands the nation and the politics and sociology of the nation. And being from a state which is not a dominant political power, and being from a law school which is not a dominant political force, at least in terms of the national judiciary, actually ought to help her. And it ought to cause a lot of people to say, well, who is this person that's being mentioned, and why is she being mentioned? And once you take a look at her, you see what the Congressman sees in her, and what the state of South Carolina sees in her. I would at least say the progressive part of the state of South Carolina sees in her, and why she should be on the court, why she will make an outstanding addition to the court.
Brunel, let me ask you one more question before we go into some local stuff here in Minnesota that I wanted Yusef to talk about transitions in our legislature and on the Ramsey County board coming up. But what about this as a teachable moment? I think it's wonderful that we're having this conversation. I believe it's our duty, and we have to seize the opportunity to put into the vocabulary of our community to create a public mind that is both attentive, attuned, and aware, that has the capacity to articulate our interest and reveal our awareness of the process, the system, and with that, be intentional and on the offensive in creating the kind of society, the kind of court, the kind of country that serves our interest as Americans. What do you think, Dean Powell?
Well, I do think that this is one of those significant moments, not simply because this is a moment at which it is almost certain that the first Black woman will be appointed to the Supreme Court, but also a teachable moment in terms of saying to all within the nation, look at our court and ask whether this is the best that we can do as a court. We have a court which is aged, which is from elitist universities, which is overwhelmingly Catholic. Is that the nation that we live in? Or is that the court that we want making decisions for the next 30 years about who we are as a nation and where we are going, particularly at a time when it is absolutely clear that the demographics of the nation are changing, the needs of the nation are changing, and this nation's standing in the world is being ruthlessly challenged and examined. So, yeah, this is a moment in which we ought to be assessing what is the role of the court and what is our role as citizens in terms of demanding a court that looks like the nation.
Yusef, bring that into the local politics. You and I talked before we started the show about changes. The current county commissioner chair for Ramsey County. Ramsey is the county in which the state capital, St. Paul, is seated. That's where Yusef is right now, across the river from me and Clinton. We're in North Minneapolis. But Tony Carter was a major and is a major player in county politics in Minnesota and in Ramsey County as the chair. Tony Carter is also the mother of the mayor of St. Paul, Melvin Carter, and her husband was a career police officer. And so it's a family that's been involved in the political culture, political life of the community for a generation or more. And with Tony Carter resigning, State Representative Rita Moran has said she wants to run for that seat. Give people an idea of what dynamics come into the local political arena in St. Paul, in Ramsey County, as this decision is coming before the public.
Thank you, Alan. Let me say thank you and good afternoon to Brother Burnell before I begin. Hennepin County, where Minneapolis is located, has 45 cities. And St. Paul, the capital of Minnesota, as you mentioned, is part of Ramsey County, which has 19 cities. So the county government is a regional governing policy board that controls the Elections Bureau, the Sheriff's Department, welfare, all of the social services across Ramsey County. And the concentration of people of color in Ramsey County is not unlike Hennepin County. It's the central city, the capital city of St. Paul, and the first tier of suburbs. And then the exurbs, or the suburbs that are further out, are primarily white, because 58% of the people in the state of Minnesota live in the suburbs surrounding Minneapolis and St. Paul. So Walitha Tony Carter, the chair of the Ramsey County Board that governs these 19 cities in terms of municipal policy, has stated that she is not going to run for re-election. And one of the candidates who has so far announced that they're going to run for Commissioner Carter's seat is Representative Rita Moran, who has been in the House of the state legislature, the lower chamber, for the past 10 or 12 years. Now, it is doubtful that she would step down from that position to run for the county board seat, because the two elections overlap but are not concurrent. They're both not held at the same time. So that could create, if Rita Moran were elected or were to step down, a vacancy in her seat, which is in the one of the largest African-American communities in St. Paul, Summit University, Thomas Dale, Lex Hamlin, and the north end of Ray Street. The county commissioners are not a very well-known group in terms of public education or governance. Our property taxes go to the city, to the school district, and to the county, but the county and the city determine what kind of levy increases they're going to have. The school district has to put any levy increase on the ballot in a referendum, and the voters have to pass that referendum for the school district to increase its levy. So the school district and the city basically run their own show. And if they want to increase 5, 7, 10%, they just go ahead and do it. And the voters can go to the typical annual budget meeting and express their concerns. But in general, the county commissioners have made up their mind. The county board does have a lot of money, but again, it's spread out across these 19 cities in St. Paul and 45 cities in Minneapolis for the Hennepin County Commission. So the voters really don't have as much knowledge or interaction with their county commissioner. Now, they all have legislative aides who provide constituency services. If people are having trouble with welfare or with the sheriff's office or with the Elections Bureau, they can contact the county commissioner, and the legislative assistant will advocate or make a phone call, try and intervene on their behalf. But it's seen as a lower level of governance in terms of public awareness and in terms of citizen involvement. Tony is the African-American chair and the only African-American on the Ramsey County Board. We have no African-Americans on the city council, and Rena is one of 2 African-American female representatives, 3, with Representative John Thompson in the state legislature. And then we have a Somali brother who I believe represents Hennepin County or the Minneapolis side. I'm not sure where his residence is.
Cedar Riverside neighborhood, South Minneapolis. Yeah.
So the county has been, unfortunately, in the background, but the fact that these 2 offices, the fact that Representative Moran is going to run for the county board, and the phone lines are ringing all over District 4 in Ramsey County in terms of who's interested, who's expressed the willingness to run, and who's going to publicly declare themselves. I think it's going to be a wide field. And the fact that the state representative is running may make the interest in people running for her seat more attractive. So it promises to be an interesting political and electoral season. And we will have the opportunity to vet the candidates, to, again, register and get people set to vote, and hopefully carry that expanded interest into the midterm and the presidential elections.
So you said, let me ask Kamal and Burnell to talk about the process, the notion of engagement and what's at stake, just as you've outlined how critically important it is that we see these changes as opportunity and reasons to rally our people to the polls. Kamal, Atlanta, the governor.
Before you do,
Go ahead.
Before you do, Al, I want to ask Kamal if we can borrow that sister who did all that organizing in Georgia. And in the United States, because she's tough. She's been here several times, and people just go crazy when she's on the rostrum. I'm sorry.
Stacey Abrams. That's Stacey Abrams.
Yeah, she's tough, man. She's tough.
Yeah, Burnell, Burnell, do you have a response?
I was going to defer to you.
Georgia.
Take any opportunity that you can to organize the people is what I see. When you went through how it's broken down, it seems as though the power is a long way away from the people, from the voters. But you have to, unless it can be changed, you have to just take advantage of whatever opportunities you have.
And remember, we got redistricting to deal with on top of all of this. And I know you're catching hell down there in Atlanta with that issue.
Yeah, it's always more work to do than, Jesus said, the work is out there, but the workers are few. So
many are called.
Yeah. Burnell, jump in. How do we mobilize and ensure that we are conversant and motivated to be at the table, to be involved, to have our voices matter?
I wish that I had an easy answer to that. But what I would say is that given the state of things today, if Black and brown and women and urban voters can't be motivated in this circumstance, one wonders what the hell has to happen in order to get people motivated. I mean, we've got a situation in which 26 or so of the states are actively working to change the way in which the electorate participates in the process, to change it in a way that will make it more difficult for people of color, more difficult for young people, more difficult for urbanites even to cast their votes.
Burnell, forgive me for interrupting, but there have been 440 pieces of legislation introduced in 48 states to suppress the vote. And these folks are declaring open season on African American and low income voters, and they're raising hell.
Well, the reason I focused on the 26 or so is that those are in jurisdictions where the political process is almost entirely in the hands of the Republican Party, and that's what makes them so
diabolical,
so frightening and diabolical. That's what makes this particular time one in which, if you care about who you are and who your neighbors are and who your family is, you've got to get out and vote and be motivated. One commentator has said that you can't out-organize formal suppression. And I think that we need to think about that, where where the effort has been made and completed to reorganize the standards by which people are going to participate, it may not make any difference at all that people are motivated to vote in a rigged system like that. And I think that we need to think very hard about that. And what it means is that we're going to have to work extra hard just to stay even this round of during the elections.
We're out of time. This has been a great conversation. My cousin, Dean Vernell Venable Powell, thank you so much for jumping in the call. My colleague and friend and neighbor, Clinton Collins, lifelong friend, Kamal J. King from Atlanta, and my partner here in Minnesota, Yusef Mjini. Thanks to all of you. Thanks to those who are listening on YouTube or on Facebook. We'll be here next week talking about things that matter. I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you.
Stay safe.